Historic Richmond Town today in front of the Kruser-Finley House. And we're going to walk you through it and give you a little bit of the history and a little bit of the history of the restoration of the building. The house was built originally in 1790 or 20. They doubled the size by adding one more room. They put the spring eave, which is a Dutch feature on the house. In the Civil War, they added one more section, sometime between the end of the Civil War and 1874. So this was a workroom, and we believe it was used by a succession of different tradesmen: carpenter, wheelwright, cooper, and a cordwainer or a shoemaker. Now we could walk around, take a walk in. This house was, it's called Dutch framing. The Dutch and the English had two completely different styles of building a house. Partly because in Holland, which was the lowlands, they didn't have a lot of trees. Mostly they built in brick, so they weren't real comfortable in building total wooden houses. And they used a slightly simpler framing system than the English, who had lots of woods and did a lot of framing. The Dutch would make what were called beds. And this would be, a bed is one post, beam going across to another post. That's the cross section of the house. And they would make these all identical, and then just basically lay them out one and another and another and another as much as they needed. Then they could throw in a small brace here and there to keep it from tipping. And then on the tops of the post, there'd be another beam coming across, tying everything together, which we'll go upstairs later and we'll look at that. And then you don't see it here, but on the interior walls, the walls would be filled with clay and some kind of fiber. They used either salt hay. Sometimes, if there was a canyon nearby, they'd use animal hair. Sometimes a combination. And it was just basically mud. We've done some digging around here, and the soil is actually clay for at least 30 feet down. So there is plenty of clay available. And they would fill this in and they would drop in these sticks to reinforce it as they go. And then over all this, they would plaster. And the clay is what's called thermal mass. It's not really insulating, but it absorbs heat from the sun or from the fire inside, and then slowly gives it off again. And a lot of thermal mass, either stone or clay like this, will keep a house cool into the summer for quite a while, until the stone eventually heats up or the clay heats up. And in the winter, once it heats up from fires and whatnot, it'll keep warm, even when the fire goes out. Now, another detail, in this room, it never had a ceiling, or at least not much later. So the beams are plain smooth and chamfered, and you could just barely here and there see an axe mark, but the idea was to get rid of them. Next room was slightly fancier, and this one had a ceiling right from the beginning, so they never bothered plating these beams. These were just left with the axe marks from hewing. Now, hewing, if you're not familiar, it took quite a while for any of the colonists to build sawmills, mostly because it was illegal. England particularly didn't want any skilled craftsmen in any industry in the colonies so they could sell products. And So all the initial framing was generally done with an axe. The logs would just be squared. Because it's a lot of work, but it's less work than using a two-man saw. I've done both, and hewing is actually easier. Here you can see, I mean, it's easy to tell the dark, charred timbers are the original things. Everything else had to be replaced with all new wood. We used the same species, we matched the sizes, and it was all done with the same kind of tools. And all the floorboards are the same species of pine, and they all had to be hand-planed smooth. And they're all tongue groove. Tongue groove floors are especially important when you don't have a ceiling, because floorboards will swell and shrink with changes in humidity. And when they shrink, you can have all kinds of dirt falling down through the slats. With the tongue groove, even though it's expanding, contracting, there's no opening. It also stiffens up the board so they don't under weight move past each other. It makes it a much stiffer floor. This is the hearth, the fireplace. It was used both for heating and for cooking. You can see this is a brick oven. We should take a shot outside too to show the beehive dome. Now the way this is used is a fire is built in there, generally with wood, until the brick gets hot, and then the ashes are taken out, and the food can be put in there and baked just by the retained heat of the brick. This is the workroom. It was built sometime after the Civil War, but before 1874. This is where the fire originated, and everything in it burned, so we had to replace pretty much everything. Woodworker, a cord waiter, a wheelwright owned this, and presumably worked in the shop. And we also know that the brother of one of the owners was a cooper. And one thing that always made us think that this was really, the tip-off was the door right behind, which is very wide enough to get a barrel in and out. And we couldn't think of any other reason why a door would be that big. But there is an oral history that there was a cooper in here. But since he didn't own the building, his name is not on any of the deeds. We have people that have done research, and they have all the property owners and all the grants and the bills of sale, so we know all the owners back to the original. Great. Okay, here we are in the attic of the central section. This room was never finished at all, so we get to see the framing. The rafters, which have a bit of a taper to them, and then at the bottom end, there's a wedge-shaped piece put on that extends out and forms the spring eave, the curved eave of the roof. Put out. The wall boards, unlike in some of the other places, were not tongue and groove. They were just butted together, so they had strips going across just to close off the joints, make them more airtight. This is a batten door. It's 4 boards and then 2 battens that hold it together. It's nailed with rose head nails. These are nails made by hand, hammered out. Generally, in the colonies here, rose head nails would have 4 petals. I've been to England, though. In England, rose head nails have 5 petals, because roses have 5-pole symmetry. At least nails in the tower are. Now, the way this is done is that the nails are long, and they're driven right through, and the tips are bent over, and then the whole nail is then folded back into the wood. So it forms almost like a staple. But what you've got is a nail that is never going to loosen up. Okay, we're going to look at the chimney. You'll notice it's not straight. That was intentional. And in fact, the chimney wasn't damaged in the fire, so we didn't change anything. But the hearth downstairs is not centered on the room. But generally, they like the chimneys to come out centered on the ridge of the roof. So the chimney stack was made intentionally corbelled out. By corbel, I mean that the bricks were just extended out past the brick below it. And this was just a feature to make the exterior of the house more symmetrical. Okay, so here we are on the outside of the original section, and we're looking at the oven. The dome on top is it's called a beehive oven. And you can see that it's a little off center. But the chimney is centered, and that's why the chimney inside the attic comes up at a slight angle. One thing else you can see is the spring eaves, which was typically Dutch. But by Dutch, I mean Dutch colonists. Because you don't actually see it much in Holland. You see it all up and down the Hudson River, though. And the odd thing is that even though the Dutch were replaced quite early, and people who had really no Dutch background themselves kept building this way up and down the Hudson for 200-300 years. But I think people still sometimes do it. Just they like the look. It's interesting the way styles hold on. Okay, thank you for viewing this tour. And of course, you're welcome to come and walk around the grounds yourself. And yeah, that's it.